No one should misunderstand me. I truly understand very well the Haredi philosophy and way of thinking. In fact, some would say I understand it too well. I've already been criticized for what sounded like some kind of a defense or seeing eye to eye with Charedim about this recent rally or atzeret or tefillah or demonstration, call it what you will. I
You
don't
judge them.
I
You
don't
judge
agree.
them
I
very
don't
fiercely.
agree with all of Haredi ideology and thinking because I think there's a better way. But it's not that I'm incapable of understanding where they're coming from. And if you're not capable of understanding where they're coming from, then you can't discuss the matter at all. Then you're just not. You cannot make any intelligent contribution to such a conversation.
Your recent defense of the gathering, or at least your recent perspective, really showed on this video. I try to watch all of your videos and learn from you in every context. Really showed how deeply you care about the Haredi population. Showed how much you cared about all of Am Yisrael and bridging the Haredim into the overall segment of the Jewish population. And you don't pull any punches. And it showed you could see it from their lens, and you tried to get others to see it from their lens.
Yes, well, thank you for saying so, for your kind words. But what can I say? I think you're right. In other words, yes, I am trying to see all the various angles. And this is not the case generally, shall we say, in the Dati Leumi, the national religious Zionist religious world. Most of the Rabbanim in that world, and I don't count myself among their number, nor do I count myself among the number of the Haredi world. Um, I refuse to be categorized or placed in a particular box. Um, most of them do not see it that way. This came to light very clearly last week when um, prior to this rally, a certain well-known uh, national religious rabbi expressed his position that his students should not go to this rally. They're clearly from a non-Haredi background. These are people who go to his yeshiva or his mechina kedam tzva'it, his pre-military Torah academy, whatever you want to call it, and then they serve in the army. And something like 25 or more of their former students have so far died in this recent war, for example. Hashem Yikom Damam. And and he said, well, I don't agree with their ideology by not serving in the army. So how can I tell my students go to this rally? So I'm opposed to going to the rally. And that makes a lot of sense. But then he heard that his own Rav, Rav Tzvi Tau, uh, was not of that opinion, but actually expressed an opinion more along the lines that I expressed. Not in the same words. I mean, I don't understand usually what Rav Tau has to say. It's very waffly and it's impossible to follow, and that's just how he thinks, and that's okay, that's fine. But the bottom line was similar to what I was saying, and he was actually in favor of his students going to that rally, even though they're not Haredim at all. In other words, you see, a majority of the national religious rabbanim are just on a different wavelength. They don't understand. They can't see that they should be on the same side as the Charedim, and they cannot see that as the pasuk in Tehillim says, "Haver ani lireacha uleshomrei pikudecha." I am a friend. I am a colleague of all those who fear you and follow your commandments. That should be the first and most obvious rule of thumb. That we're both people speaking in the name of Torah, living according to the Torah. So we should be able to work together or at least converse and understand each other in some fashion, but they're not capable. And that's, I think, a major problem. It goes without saying that most of the secular world cannot understand the Haredi perspective. But a Torah Jew should be able to understand the perspective. And also, I believe, should be able to see that the entire situation is tragic, as we're discussing, and deleterious to Klal Yisrael. And this has to change somehow. and without coming out and saying explicitly what we all know to be true, and that is, just as most Jews in the world read recently Parashat Noah, um, that the world became corrupt. Hamas, in every possible sense of that word, Hamas or Hamas in Arabic, and in Hamas in the original meaning in the Hebrew, in other words, corruption and violence and lawlessness. That's what Hamas means on every level. If we cannot get up and say, look, the world around us is Watimore Haaretz Hamas, and all kol basar hishhitet darko, as it says in the Torah in Parashat Noach. In other words, people and as it were, creation itself was corrupted. And this is, of course, a result of one thing and one thing only, and that is, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said in a famous speech, when he was describing that which he heard from the old people, the old timers, when he was a young man in the early days of Soviet Russia. And the old timers who remembered the pre-communist years were saying to him, the reason for all that's going on, all the living hell in which we find ourselves here in the USSR, is because men have forgotten God. That was the message. It's an obvious and basic truth, which simple God-fearing Christian Russian peasants understood. And if they expressed that view too loudly, they frequently found themselves shot in the back of the head or in the Gulag. Correct? And this is what some of them said to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And he expressed this many years later in a famous speech. Well, that's all very true, but you don't need to hear it from Solzhenitsyn because it's in the Torah. It's well known to all of us. It has to be known to all of us. When men forget Hashem, the world descends into something terrible, something horrendous. And you have to be able to face the secular world, look them straight in the eye, and tell them this. The world that you have created around us is a disaster. And if you want us to live differently, well, the society has to be different also, because we can't deal with that society. And yes, it's tragic and it's terrible and it's inexcusable, and you can complain all you like, and much of what you say will be true. But unless you admit that it is your godlessness that has brought these calamities upon humankind in general, and specifically upon Klal Yisrael, there's no way forward. If you understand, as we have said already, that Haredi society is an invention. It's a newfangled invention. There are some people very naive and people lacking in understanding and historical awareness. They think that Haredi society today is simply a continuation of what the Jewish people have been doing from time immemorial. Well, that's a fairy tale. That's not true. It's an invention. Yiddishkeit was reinvented by Agudat Yisrael, by the Haredi world 120 years ago, as a response to the modern world, as a response to the fact that between 80 and 90% of the Jewish people had turned their back on Torah. This is not just today. This is going back 100 years. That was the reality already then. It's not that the Zionist movement invented secularism. Okay. The Zionist movement was an outgrowth of the new Jewish reality in which most Jews were secular. It's not by accident that the Zionist movement was a secular movement. Most Jews were secular at this point, as I pointed out before. When Rabbeinu Rav Kook was born in Tov Resh Kaf He, 1865 Leminyonam, you could say, it's hard to prove precise figures and statistics and what have you, but it seems roughly generally correct to say that in Europe, 80% of Jews were religious, at least Shomer Shabbat. Okay. When Rav Kook passed away 70 years later in Torah Tzadiheh in 1935, Leminyanam, they had been reversed. 80% of the Jews in the world were no longer Shomer Shabbat, were no longer religious. In other words, in his lifetime, the Jewish world completely shifted around. It was turned on its head. And the Zionist movement came to be exactly in the middle of that period, when Rav Kook was in his 30s, 40s. So Haredi Judaism is an invention. It's not authentic, it's an invention. It's a hora'at sha'ah. In halachic terms, what's a hora'at sha'ah? It's a stopgap measure, halacha, given by the Beth Din, as it were, to deal with a particular situation, a current crisis. But it's not the real McCoy. It's not the way the Torah should be. It's not the way the Jewish people should be living their lives. It's a hora'at sha'ah. It's a crisis mode version of Jewish life. And at some point, when you live in crisis mode indefinitely, for generation upon generation, then what are you in fact doing? You are perpetuating that which is abnormal and claiming that, or by dint of reality, you are making it normal. You are taking that which is abnormal and turning it into that which is normal. You are making something unnatural and into something which should be perceived as so it seems, as natural, as the natural order of things. But it's not the natural order of things. That's with regards to the Haredi world. On the other side of the equation, in the religious Zionist world, they made the mistake of deciding all too eagerly and all too completely to live their lives according to based on the assumptions and terminologies of the secular Zionist world. And when you work with another person's terminologies and use their language, and you become used to the way they look at things and the way they work and the terms they use, over time, that has a major impact on you. And that's why you have 50% of the Zionist religious world today, the younger generation, turn their back on Torah. So, but all these camps made certain decisions, all of which you can justify, but all of which have major holes in them. And eventually, those chickens can't come home to roost. And you need to deal with these realities. Now, the Haredi world is unwilling and unable to deal with these realities. And many of them, including many great Rabbanim amongst them, have convinced themselves that many of the fairy tales that they have been telling their students for generations now are in fact true. That's what the Torah really thinks, what the Torah really states. For example, that min Torah, those who study Torah are exempt from military service. That's not true. It's a lie. You can easily disprove this based on clear halachic sources. If I told you that, I think it's Daf Mem Daled Masechet Sotah in the Aruch LaNer, a famous Haredi book which you'll find in every Haredi yeshiva, he writes explicitly, Talmidei Chachamim yotzim lemilchemet Misua. All right, so it's written there. Do they quote that? They won't quote that. It's an inconvenience, so they won't quote it, but it's there. But you don't need the Aruch LaNer. It's in the Bavli, it's in the Yerushalmi, it's everywhere you look. But they choose not to know, because again, it's not about what the Torah actually says, what the Torah teaches. It's about a hora'at sha'ah. It's about crisis mode reality and management, managing a crisis. You can manage a crisis in hora'at sha'ah terms as a stopgap measure, some particular time-specific policy. You can do that for a time, but not forever. And eventually, it's whatever is you're doing, because it's not natural and not normal and incorrect at root, it will unravel. And that's where we are today.
We're watching it.
Yeah, we're living in that reality. And both of these camps in the Torah world, the Haredi and the non-Haredi religious nationalist, Zionist, call them what you like, world, they all have the best of intentions. They do, or they did. And they all try to deal with a very complex reality, which is completely new in the Jewish world. In Jewish experience, there was never such a reality. And it's therefore not, it's not surprising that different Chachamim, different Rabbanim will come up with different stopgap measures to deal with that reality. And it's not surprising that they will not see eye to eye on everything, because it's not written anywhere explicitly and clearly what you should do in this situation. But the fact is, we see today that both of these ways of doing things are breaking down. And it's time for honest, clear-headed Talmidei Chachamim to meet, actually, so hopefully from different backgrounds, different groups with different, who've heard different ideas from their various Rashi Yeshiva over the years, to somehow have a meeting of minds. And that's what a Beth Din is. A Beth Din is supposed to be a meeting of minds. But can you suggest, can you imagine seeing a certain Rav from Bnei Brak whose words were recorded, and I heard a couple of months ago, in which he said, we have to explain ourselves to these Rabbanim, these Dati Leumi Rabbanim. Who are they? They're nothing at all. They're Amei Aretz. What do we have? We have no. Why would we even spend our time trying to justify what we think or what we say to these people? And the fact is, the same disdain and lack of understanding exists on the other side as well. These people don't understand. They don't understand A, B, C, and D in the Torah, and we do. And when there's no possibility of seeing eye to eye on anything, on agreeing on even the most basic terms of frame of reference, then you cannot have a discussion. You cannot have a Beth Din. You cannot have a real Torah discussion, and that's where we are today.
This is so disheartening, and it is so sad. And I'm not trying to bash one sect over another. I mean, the Haredi world I bash for two reasons. Number one, it's the only world that I know. Number two is, I have to say, Rav, I expect more from the Haredi world because of they're so shakua in Torah. I expect more, and perhaps rightfully, wrongfully, but that's why I do hold them. I admit that I hold the Haredi world to a higher standard because of their dedication to Torah learning. And perhaps I shouldn't, but that's why. I mean, this is so disturbing and so sad.
Yes, but
I would
you're correct. But keep in mind that, as I explained, when the system that you've put in place, and which has been around for some generations now, is unnatural,
is on emergency mode.
It's unnatural and therefore unhealthy. Anything which is unnatural is eventually unhealthy. Correct? You can survive something unnatural for a time, but eventually it becomes unhealthy. And an unhealthy mode of living engenders unhealthy behaviors.
Absolutely, 100%.
So when you refer to various forms of behavior or lack of midot or ways of looking at things and way of speaking, what have you, in the Haredi world,
right?
And I think the same things exist in the Dati Leumi world as well, of different types, different sorts, but the same. We can point to serious flaws in both camps. When that is the reality, then an unhealthy, unnatural, untenable way of living, at root it's untenable over the long term, it will result in all manner of aberrations and unhealthy and even very, very harmful and pernicious behaviors and mindsets, and that if you keep that in mind, you will understand everything that you're referring to.
Right now, thank you. When you use the term crisis mode, it's no different than sending a soldier into a field for months and months and years at a time. The human body can only sustain crisis mode or trauma for a certain amount of time. Eventually, there's a breakdown of the entire system. The body can't handle it to always be on guard 24/7. It's just that's now. Thank you, Rob. That's very clarifying. The crisis mode, emergency mode, can only last for so long before
I'm going.
everything falls apart. Yes,
Just like
thank you,
Again,
Rob.
I'm not saying that everything we discussed was
Mm,
necessarily very
mm.
emotionally uplifting
I'll,
or
Reality.
optimistic, but you need sometimes just to call the shots as you see them and state the
Absolutely.
reality as it is, in order to hopefully eventually come to terms with that reality and begin to be able to deal with it. If
Hmm.
you bury your head in the sand, then you won't get anywhere.
Right,
I'll just
100%.
share.
Thank
I'll
you,
share
Rob.
at the end the hopeful note is Rav Bar-Hayim. I think you're the bridge. You and what
Mhm.
you have shared and what you represent, and it can be all of us can follow in your footsteps in some meeting of the minds. You are the bridge between these worlds, and you are the voice of reason, and some other courageous leaders as well. And we can hopefully
Well,
follow in those footsteps.
again, thank you for your kind words. I don't know if they're deserved, but you all must do the best we can and speak the truth. Speaking the truth
The
is the
truth.
solution to all things. That is
Mhm.
Amen.
the only true solution to all things, no matter how
Wow.
difficult it may be.